Okay, so going to work through the National 5 2014 paper 1. So this is the non-calculator paper and going through the questions. Right, so let's start. So our first question we have is evaluate 5/12 times by 2 and 2/9. So we've got 5/12 times by 2 and 2/9. Okay, so to be able to multiply fractions, the first thing we need to have them both as top-heavy fractions. So the 5/12 is fine, but we need to change the 2 and 2/9. So if we think about it, if we have two kind of objects and we split them into 9, and then we did the other one into 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we've got 2 more 9ths left over. In total, we've got 9 from this one, 9 from that one, and then another 2. So that's going to be 20 over 9. Okay? So here, we can simplify before we multiply, or we can simplify after we multiply. It's generally easy to simplify before you multiply. Okay, so we're looking to simplify, and we simplify across. So we can simplify if the 20 and the 12, or the 5 and the 9. So because the 5 and the 9, the only timetable they're in is the 1 times table, we can't do anything with those. So the 12 and the 20. So 12 and 20, they're both in both the 2 and the 4 times table, but we want to do the 4 times table because the 4 times table is the bigger one, so that's what we want to do. So 12 is the third number in the 4 times table, so we can replace it with a 3. And 20 is the fifth number in the 4 times table, so that's why that becomes a 5. And now we can just multiply. We multiply the two top numbers, so we have 5 times 5, which is 25. And then we've got 3 times 9, which is 27. And that is our answer in its simplest form. If you multiplied your things separately, so if we kind of do a second term, so if we didn't simplify first, we would have 5 times 20, 5/12 times 20 over 9. So you would get 100 on the top. So 5 times 20 is 100. 12 times 9 is 108. And then you would be able to simplify that because they're both, again, you can both divide both of those by 4 to get your 25 over 27. So it doesn't matter which way you simplify, but because the question has in it, write your answer in the simplest form, you don't get that mark until you've simplified. Okay, so for the first mark for this question is for changing them, so starting multiplying your questions, and your second mark is for having it in its simplest form. But if you have this, if you've got the 100, this line here, the 100 over 108, but you haven't simplified, you only get 1 mark because it says simplest form. So it needs to be in its simplest form for you to get the second mark. Right, so on to question 2. Right, so for question 2, we have to multiply our brackets and collect like terms. So we've got 2x minus 5 and we've got 3x plus 1. Okay, so we have to multiply out all our terms. So we multiply the first one by the first one in the first bracket. So we're using FOIL. So the first of each. So we've got 2x times 3x, which is going to be 6x squared. Then we do our outsides, so that's 2x times by plus 1, so we get plus 2x. Then we're going to have our insides, which is minus 5 times 3x, which is minus 15x. Remembering that when you've got a positive times a negative, your answer is negative. And then we've got minus 5 times 1, which is minus 5. And then we can collect our like terms. There's no other x squared terms, so that stays on its own. Then we've got plus 2x minus 15x, and that's going to give us minus 13x, and then our minus 5. Okay, so the marks for this question, you get 1 for starting to multiply it and getting kind of 3 of the terms correctly in your first one, and then you get your second mark for collecting all your terms together correctly. Right, on to question 3. Okay, so question 3, we've got x squared minus 14x plus 44, and we need to express it in the form x minus a all squared plus b. So we've got x squared minus 14x plus 44. Okay, so we need to put this into our brackets. So we know that at the front we're going to have the x and we're going to have a squared there. But it's how do we decide what goes in here? Okay, so that is to do with our x term, so our minus 14x. So we need to half that, and that's what goes in here. So in here, we're going to have minus 7. So it's just the coefficient that we're halving, not halving the x squared. So the reason this works, it's a little explanation, is if we do x minus 7, so if we multiply this out, we're going to get x squared minus 7x minus 7x plus 49. Okay, because the negative times negative gives us positive. So if we kind of collect that together, we're going to have x squared minus 14x plus 49. Okay, so that gives us kind of some of what we need, but not all of everything we need. So we've got our x squared minus 14x, but we've got plus 49, and we need plus 44. So from here, we need to kind of subtract that minus 7 squared, so subtract that 49, and then add on 44. So we've got x minus 7 squared minus 49, because minus 7 squared is 49, and we're still subtracting it, plus 44. So we get x minus 7 squared minus 5. Okay, so for this question, your marks are for having the correct bracket with the square, and then for completing the process to get the minus 5. Right, so on to question 4. Okay, so question 4, we have a vector question. So we've been asked to find the resultant vector 2u minus v when u is minus 2, 3, 5, and v is 0, minus 4, 7. And we've been asked to write our answer in component form. Okay, so for this question, because we've been asked to find 2u, so I would always start with finding that answer separately. So if u is minus 2, 3, 5, all we have to do is multiply each of those numbers by 2 to find 2u. So 2 times minus 2 is minus 4, 2 times 3 is 6, and then 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so then we can do our question. So we have 2u take away v. So we're going to have minus 4, 6, 10, take away 0, minus 4, 7. Okay, so we look at our x components first. So we've got minus 4 take away 0, so that's going to stay minus 4. And then we've got 6 take away minus 4, so that becomes 6 add 4, because if we're taking away a negative, it's the same as adding it. So that's going to give us 10. And then we've got 10 take away 7, which is 3. Okay, right, so for this question you get 1 mark for calculating 2u and then 1 for the correct solution. Right, let's move on to question 5. Right, so for question 5 we have this triangle KLM. We've been told that KM is 18 centimeters. We know that the sine of K is 0.4 and that the sine of L is 0.9. Okay, so we've got two different sines. We've been told the values of two different sine or two different angles, and we've got the length of KM, and we need to find the length of LM. So if we think about it, sine K is the sine of this angle in here, yeah? So across from there, that would be side K. And then we've got L over here, and that's across from there. So what rule do we know which uses an angle and the side across from it? It's the sine rule. So this is going to be a sine rule question. So we have, just from our formula sheet, A over sine A equals B over sine B equals C over sine C. Okay, so for now, let's just not think about the way they've labelled it in the question. Let's label it how we want it. So instead of K, let's call that one A. So that means that we have the little a across from there. That one's B, and we've got the little b across from there. And that one's C, so the little c is across from there. There's nothing wrong with just kind of relabeling the diagram for you to be able to use the sine rule and the cosine rule, as long as at the end you change it back to what the question's given you. So we know that A is what we need to find. A is our unknown, because that's LM. And we know that sine of K, or sine of A as we've got, is equal to 0.4. And we know that sine of L, which is B, is 0.9. And we know that B is 18. So we can substitute all these values into our formula. So we're not going to need this bit, but we've got A, which is going to be 0.4 over 0.4 is equal to B is 18, and sine B is 0.9. Okay, so now we need to rearrange to find A. So we multiply both sides by 0.4. So we get A is 18 times 0.4 over 0.9. Okay, so this is a non-calculated paper, so we've got to be able to do this without our calculators. So, timesing 18 by 0.4, how do we do it? The way to do it is to times by 4 and then divide by 10. So we have 18 times 4, so we've got 8, 16, 24, 32. And then, so it's going to be 72. We divide by 10, so it's going to be 7.2. So we have 7.2 divided by 0.9. And then this is the same as saying 72 divided by 9. And we know that 72 divided by 9 is 8. So our answer is going to be 8. And it's going to be centimetres. And we know that it's LM, that's what we've been asked for in the question. So saying LM is equal to 0.8 at the end is going to be the best way to do it. Right. So the marks for this question, you get 1 for setting up your sine rule, so substituting into the sine rule. 1 for knowing how to solve, so rearranging to here. And then 1 for your answer. So even if you kind of get a bit stumped by the fact that in a non-calculated paper you're having to multiply by decimals, it's worth getting to that point because you get 2 out of the 3 marks for this question without actually having to do the calculation. Okay, so it's always worth getting something down, even if you're like, I can't use those numbers, I'm not going to get that. Getting to the point, getting as far as you can in a question before the maths or the arithmetic becomes too difficult for you is always the best thing to do. Right, so on to question 6. Okay, so we're on question 6. We've got a straight line. We've been told 2 points, and we have been asked to find the line of best fit in terms of F and C. Okay, so again, kind of like with the last question, for now, I would say kind of relabel. So you've got X and Y. So instead of F, we can use X to start with, as long as you change it back at the end, because it said you need to use F and C. But you can still think of it in terms of X and Y for the majority of the question, as long as at the end you've got your F and your C in your answer. Okay, so taking our points, point A represents 5 grams of fat, so that's our F, so that's our X, and it's 200 calories. So that's our first point, so that's point A. And then point B is 25 grams of fat, and it's 500 calories. Right, so let's fix that up. So we've got B, which is 2550. So we've been asked to find the equation of the line. So to find the equation of the line, the first thing we need to do is find the gradient. So the gradient is the change in y, so y2 minus y1, over the change in x, so x2 minus x1. So this is why kind of writing down the coordinates is a good thing to do so we don't get them kind of mixed up. So if we label this one as x1, y1, and this one is x2, y2. Remember, it doesn't matter which one you use as the first coordinate, which one you use as the second, as long as you remember it's x then y, and both the 1s are in the same coordinate, both the 2s are on the same coordinate. Okay, so the important bit is remembering it's x then y, and that the 1s are the same point, and the 2s are the other. Okay, so we put our values in, so we're going to get 500, take away 200, all over 25, take away 5. So we're going to get 300 divided by 20. Okay, and we can simplify that. We can get rid of our zeros, because we've got one on the top, and then we're going to get 30 divided by 2, so that is 15. Now we need to substitute this in. So if we remember, we've got the equation y minus b equals m x minus a. Okay, we're not given this, so we need to remember that equation. And again, we use one of our points. I'll use the first point, so point A. And this time, instead of this being x1 and y1, this is a and b. So again, it's still alphabetical. The x value becomes a, the y value becomes b. Okay, and then we can substitute in because we know our m, we know our a, we know our b. So we have y minus 200 is equal to 15 times by x minus 5. Okay, so we multiply this out. We're going to get y minus 200 is equal to 15x. And then it's going to be taking away 5 times 15, which is 75. So then we add 200 to both sides to get y is equal to 15x plus 125. But we're not quite done because it's been asked for us to give it in terms of f and c. So we know that our y is the same as the c, so that goes in there. And then our x is the f. So we put those in, and that's us. Right, so for part B, we've been told that the sandwich contains 40 grams of fat, so F is 40. And we've been asked to use the answer to part A to calculate it. So we've got C equals 15F plus 125. So we put in 40 for F, so 15 times 40 plus 125. So 15 times 40, what you do is you times it by 4, then times it by 10. So when you do that, you get 600. So you're going to get 600 plus 125. So your answer should be 725. Right, so the marks for this question. So you get 1 for calculating your gradient at this point. You get 1 for substituting into the equation, so into here, so when you've got here, and then the last mark for the first part is for the c equals 15f plus 125. If you've just got y equals 15x plus 125, you don't get that third mark because it's been asked specifically for you to give it in terms of f and c. Right, so for part B, it's just 1 mark, so you get your 1 mark for the 725. Okay, so let's go on and we'll look at question 7. Right, so question 7, we've been given a parabola and we've been asked to find the value of a. So we have our point, and that's minus 345, and that's our x and our y value. So we have y equals ax squared, so we need to find the a, so we just substitute our values in. So we get 45 is equal to a times by minus 3 squared. So this is where we need to be careful. So we know that minus 3 squared is minus 3 times minus 3, so that's going to be 9a. Because minus 3 times minus 3 is positive 9. So don't think that minus 3 times minus 3 is minus 9. You need to be careful and remember that if we're squaring a negative, our answer needs to be positive. So if we have 9a is equal to 45, that means that a is going to be equal to 5. Right, so you get 1 mark here for substituting in here, and your second mark is for knowing that a is 5. So that's a nice quick question, so quickly moving on to question 8. Okay, so question 8 we have surds. So we've got the square root of 40 plus 4 root 10 plus root 90. And we've got to write it in its simplest form. Okay, so this question, they've given you a nice hint in the question, something to help you out. I say this a lot to my class anyway, but because you've got 4 root 10, this is giving you a clue for where we're going with this question. Because they wouldn't give you 4 root 10 if the root 10 didn't have something to do with it. Or they generally don't. Okay? I'm going to say 99% of the time, but always be a bit careful, but I would guess. Okay? So we've got 4 root 10. So that's our place to start. So we know that we want to be working in root 10s. So for the 40, we know that we can change 40 into 4 times 10. So we get the square root of 4 times 10. And then we have our 4 root 10. And then the 90 we can split up into 9 times 10. So each of them now has that 10 that we need. So if we think about it, the square root of 4 is 2, and then the square root of 10 we just leave as the square root of 10 because there's no way to make it nicer. Okay, and then we have our 4 root 10, and then the square root of 9 is 3, and then again we leave our square root of 10. And then this is the same as just kind of, if we wanted to, we could imagine these as kind of like they were x's. So we have 2 of something, we add another 4, and then we add another 3, then we've got 9. So we know it's 9, but like it's not 9 x's we have, it's 9 lots of the root of 10. So that's us. Okay, so what we have here, your marks for the questions come from 1 for simplifying the square root of 40 to 2 root 10, 1 for simplifying the square root of 90 to 3 root 10, and then the last one for simplifying it to 9 root 10. Okay, now on to question 9. Okay, so question 9. We've been told that 4,800 tickets were sold for a tennis tournament last year, and it represents 80% of all the available tickets. So we need to calculate the total number of tickets that were available. So we know that the 80% is that 480,000 tickets. Okay, so we've got to find out what 100% was. So for this one, the easiest place to go is probably to go to 10%. You'll sometimes see you can go to 1%, you could go to 20%. It just depends on the numbers you've got. But for here, 480,000 divides quite nicely by 8. So if we kind of divide 48 by 8, we know that's going to be 6. So we're going to get 60,000 is 10%. So the 100%, so what we've done there, as a little reminder, is we've divided by 8. So I have to divide both sides by 8, because we have to do the same to both sides. So then I'm timesing by 10, so I need to times by 10 on this side too. So we get that it's equal to 600,000. Okay, so the marks for this question, 3 marks. You get 1 mark for knowing that it's saying that 80% is 480,000. You get 1 point for beginning a valid strategy, so for example finding that 10% is 60,000, and then you get 1 for your answer. Whether you find 1%, 20%, whatever you find, as long as you're doing a valid argument or doing something that's equivalent, then you get you'll get that second mark. Okay, so on to question 10. Right, okay, so for question 10, we've got a graph of y equals a of sine of brackets x plus b, and we've got to write down the values of a and b. Okay, so we need a is equal to, b is equal to. So, the a, when it's out the front here, so anything out the front of a sine graph, tells us the amplitude of the graph. So that's how high the highest point of the graph is. So we can see that that is in line with the 3. So our a, or our amplitude, is, in fact, 3. Okay, the next bit's a bit more tricky. So in here, this is talking about how the graph has moved along this axis. So if we think, our sine graph should start at 0, go up to our maximum at 90, be crossing again at 180, down to 270, and back up to 360. So this in here moves the graph and changes like where the graph starts. So changes along the x-axis, so it doesn't start at 0, it starts somewhere else. So this part in here, what we need to do for the b is look at what would we need to do to move this start back to where it's going to be. So it's at 40, so to move it back to 0, we would need to subtract 40. Yeah? So that means our b is in fact minus 40, because we need to subtract 40 to move it back to 0. So b is going to be minus 40. Right, on to question 11. Right, so question 11, we've got a straight line, has an equation 4x plus 3y equals 12, and we need to find the gradient of the line. So the only way to read the gradient of an equation is when it's in the form y equals mx plus c. So we need to rearrange this equation that we've got so that it's in that form. So we have 4x plus 3y is equal to 12. And we need y equals mx plus c. So the first thing we need to do is get the y's on their own, okay? So to do that, we're going to have to subtract 4x from both sides. Okay, so we're going to get 3y is equal to negative 4x plus 12. Just to keep it in the same format, we could have done 12 take away 4x, but we want our formula to be in y equals mx plus c, not y equals c plus mx, so we'll keep it this way. Okay, so now to get our formula so that it's just y, because we can't have 3y, we just need y on its own, we need to divide both sides by 3. And that means every single term needs to be divided by 3. So we have y, because 3 divided by 3, and I have minus 4 thirds x plus, and then 12 divided by 3, which is 4. So that means that our gradient m is minus 4 over 3. Okay, so for part B, we've been asked to find the coordinates of a point where it crosses the x-axis. So if you think about this, when we have our graph, that's our x, that's our y. When it crosses the x-axis, our x value is what we need to find, but our y value is 0. So we know that y equals 0 when it crosses the x-axis. So we can use this to find that x point. So we have 4x plus 3y is equal to 12. So we have 4x plus 3 times 0 is equal to 12. So we know that 4x, 3 times 0 is just 0. So we know 4x is 12. So that tells us that x must be 3, because 4 times 3 is 12. So then we need to write down the coordinate. So we know the coordinate is, and then it's x, then y, so it's got to be 3, 0 for where it crosses that axis. Okay, so the points here. So you get 1 point for starting to rearrange, and then 1 point for stating the gradient of the line. And then you get 1 point for part B for knowing how to find the x-coordinates, so knowing that that's when y is 0, and then 1 for stating the coordinates. And in big bold letters in the marking scheme is that you must use brackets. So you have to write this down as a coordinate, because it's asked for in the question. It said find the coordinate. Then your answer needs to be written as a coordinate. So we need to be paying really close attention to what the question is asking. And if it asks for a coordinate, your answer needs to be a coordinate. Okay? So on to question 12. Right, so we have question 12. Question 12, we've got the diagram, and quite a lot of the difficulty with this question is kind of seeing what it is we have to do. So let's just read it through and think it through logically. Okay, so we've been told that the radius of the circle is 15 centimetres. So that's going to be, it's got to be an important part of the question. So we know that the radius is 15 centimetres even, not 14, 15. Right, so we've been told that A is the midpoint of this chord PQ. So we know that's exactly halfway in between. So we know, and we can kind of draw on our diagram, that we know that these are the same length. Okay? And we know that the length from A to B is 27 centimetres. So we know that the whole thing, A to B, is 27 centimetres. And we've got the radius, which is just from C to B, so from the centre to the outside is 15. So that tells us that we know that this bit here has got to be 12 centimetres. Okay? So we've got that. What else do we know? So this line here has got to be cutting that at 90 degrees. So we know that those are both 90. And at this point our diagram's getting a little bit cluttered, so let's draw it out separately. So we've got P to Q. And then we've got our centre, keeps going. We've got A. We have C, and then somewhere up here we've got B. Because we know that's 12. We need to find the whole thing. We know these are right angles. So kind of we've got something that looks kind of like a triangle, and we can create the triangle here. So we have a triangle that is 12 there. These are both the same, so we know that it's, in fact, going to be split in two. So if we can find one half of that, we just need to double it. So from C to Q, Q's on the edge of the circle, so that is, from C to Q is going to be the radius. So we know that's going to be 15. So then we've now got a triangle where we know two of the sides and we don't know the third, so we can use Pythagoras. So for Pythagoras, our general formula is c squared equals a squared plus b squared, where c squared is always the hypotenuse. So in this case, that's our c, and then the a and the b can be either one. So we're trying to find the b, so we need to rearrange. So we have to subtract the a squared, so we're going to have b squared is equal to c squared take away a squared. So here we can substitute in. So we know our c is 15. So we have 15 squared take away 12 squared, because a is 12. So 15 squared is 225. 12 squared is 144. You're not necessarily expected to know that 15 squared is 225, but you should be able to just do a chimney sum to work it out. Okay, so we've got 225 take away 144. So again, just do a little calculation. 5 take 4 is 1, you have to carry, and then we get 8, so we get 81. So we have b squared is 81, so that means b is the square root of 81, so that is 9. So that gives us half of the distance. Okay, so PQ is going to be 2b, which is 18, and it's going to be centimetres. Right, so the marks for this question. The first mark is for kind of getting all the facts together and recognising the fact that you've got a right angle there and that you have the triangle. The second mark is for knowing how to use Pythagoras. You get 1 for finding PA squared or B squared, and then you get the last mark for finding the length of PQ, so doubling it once you've done the square root. Okay, so on to the last question, question 13. Okay, so question 13. We have a diagram. It shows the path of a rocket as it's fired in the air. So it starts at 0, goes up, and then comes down. So we've got the rocket, the height is given by this formula here. Okay, so we have to find out after how many seconds will the rocket first be at a height of 60 meters. So that is telling us that the height is 60. So we can substitute that in. So we're going to get 60 is equal to 16t minus t squared. Okay, so we've got something with a t squared. The only way we know how to solve that is by factorising. So it's kind of we've got a quadratic equation, don't we? Once we've done, if we do a little bit of kind of rearranging, we will get a quadratic equation. Because we've got a t squared term, we've got a t term, and we've got a number. So it's kind of close, but to be able to find the roots, so that's the point at which it crosses the axis, we need to substitute, don't we? Okay, so if we do this, we can rearrange. So if we add t squared to both sides, we're going to get t squared. We're going to take away 16t from both sides, so we get take away 16t, and then we've still got our 60, and that's equal to 0. So now we can factorise. So if we've got our two brackets here, so we have t squared. So this t squared comes from multiplying our first two terms. So these, the ones at the front of each of our brackets. So the only way to get t squared is to multiply t by t. Right, so now we've got to figure out what we're doing with the rest of it. So the last two terms in our brackets. So we have plus 60 here, but we have minus 16 here. So this minus helps us decide what signs we have to go. So we've got a plus here, but a minus here. The only way to get a plus when we multiply is to get either two positives or two negatives. If we have two positives, we're never going to have a negative answer here, because those would be positive too. So that means that we know that both of our signs have got to be minus. Okay, so then we have now our 60. So we need to pick two numbers to give us 60, but add to give us minus 16. So 60, we could have 10 and 6, we could have 60 and 1, we could have 30 and 2. There's all sorts of ways we can get 60, but the only way that's going to work to give us that 16 is going to be, in fact, the 10 and the 6. So that means we know that we've got to have a 10 in there and a 6 in there. So we now know that t minus 10 has got to be equal to 0, or t minus 6 is equal to 0. So that means it's going to be t equals 10 or t equals 6. So it's asked us to find the first time it'll be at a height of 60 meters. So that is t equals 6. So it's probably best to write it out again. So it will reach 60 meters after 6 seconds. Okay, so now on to part B. So for part B, we've been asked, will the rocket reach a height of 70 meters? So to be able to do that, what we need to kind of figure out is what the height is in the middle of our curve. So if we think we go from 0 all the way up, so we can look to see if at the highest point that is 70 meters or more, that means the rocket will reach that height. If that highest point is less than 70, then it will never reach 70 meters, will it? So we need to find out what the value of h is going to be at that point there. So to do that, we kind of need to figure out our roots first. So we need to figure out where the middle of that's going to be. And what we know about parabolas are that the turning point is in halfway in between the 2 points where it crosses the axis. So if we look at height is 0, we have 16t minus t squared. So we can take out a kind of common factor, so we get t, and then we get 16 minus t. Okay, so this is to find our roots. So we set our y equal to 0 to find the roots. So we're going to get that t is equal to 0, or 16 minus t is equal to 0. So we get t is equal to 16. Okay, so the turning point is at 8, because it's halfway in between, because it's symmetrical, so the turning point is going to be halfway in between, so the turning point will be at 8. So we can then use this to substitute in to find the height of the rocket at 8 seconds. So the height at 8 is going to be 16 times 8, take away 8 squared. So 16 times 8, do a little chimney sum. 6 times 8 is 48. 1 times 8 is 8, add the 4, so we get 128. So we have 128, take away 8 squared, which is 64. So when we do that, we're going to get 64 meters. Right, so we get our height at our maximum is 64. So we need to write a little sentence to kind of communicate our answer, justify our answer. So we can say, no, it will not reach 70 meters, as its maximum height is 64 meters. Right, so going through this, the marks for this question. For part 1, you get 1 mark for knowing to set the height as 60. 1 for rearranging to equate to 0, 1 for factorising correctly, and then 1 for solving it and selecting the correct value. So kind of making sure that you've said that it's 6, not 10. Okay, so then for part B, you get 1 point for this method for finding, knowing that the turning point is at 8, so halfway in between. 1 for calculating the maximum height, and then 1 for communicating your conclusion. So no, it will not reach 70 meters as its maximum height is 64. You don't get the last mark unless you've communicated that you know why it won't reach 70, rather than you can't just say no without any explanation to get that third part. Right, so Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I could have done to make this better. Subscribe if you're liking the videos and think they're helpful. So thank you for watching.